The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Westfield Middle School, casting long shadows across the polished hallway floor. Among the crowd of students rushing to their first class, one girl stood out. Not because she was loud or seeking attention, quite the opposite. She walked with her head slightly down, a burgundy knit hat pulled snugly over her head. May had always been known for her quiet determination. At just 14 years old, she hadn't missed a single day of school in 3 years. Her teachers often praised her perfect attendance record, especially her homeroom teacher, Mrs. Chen, who would beam with pride when handing May her attendance certificate each semester. But these last few months had been different. The burgundy had become May's constant companion since winter began. At first, everyone assumed it was just because of the cold weather, but as spring arrived and the temperatures rose, the hat remained firmly in place. Some kids had started to whisper, but May's friends knew better than to ask. There was something in her eyes that told them the hat was not a fashion statement. Room 203 was already buzzing with activity when May slipped into her seat in the third row. She kept her hat pulled low, almost touching her eyebrows as she carefully arranged her notebooks on her desk. The classroom was warm, too warm for a hat, but May acted as if she didn't notice. "Good morning, class," Ms. Reynolds announced, as she strode into the room, her heels clicking against the floor tiles. The chatter immediately died down. Everyone knew Ms. Reynolds ran a tight ship. Her reputation for enforcing school rules was legendary throughout Westfield Middle. Books. "Open to page 94, please," she instructed, scanning the room with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes paused when they reached May, narrowing slightly at the sight of the burgundy hat. Ms. Reynolds cleared her throat. "Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone of school policy. No hats or head coverings inside the building." Her gaze remained fixed on May, who suddenly became very interested in the pages of her textbook. The other students exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't the first time this week that Ms. Reynolds had made this announcement. It wasn't even the second time. This was the third day in a row, and everyone knew who the message was really meant for. May pretended not to notice, her fingers nervously tracing the outline of a diagram in her science book. The classroom felt uncomfortably quiet, with only the sound of turning pages and the ticking clock on the wall. "May," Ms. Reynolds finally said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Did you not hear what I just said?" May looked up slowly, her face calm despite the 30 pairs of eyes now turned in her direction. "Yes, Ms. Reynolds," she replied softly. "Then I'm sure you understand that your hat needs to be removed while in class." May's hands gripped the edge of her desk. "I'd prefer to keep it on today if that's okay." A few students inhaled sharply. Nobody challenged Ms. Reynolds' authority, nobody. The teacher's eyebrows shot up. "It's not a matter of preference, May, it's school policy." She held out her hand expectantly. "The hat, please." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Lynn, May's best friend since 3rd grade, watched with worried eyes from the desk beside her. She knew what was under that hat. She was one of the few who did. May didn't move. Her eyes, usually so bright and eager to please, now held a quiet resistance that surprised even her closest friends. Ms. Reynolds' patience was visibly wearing thin. Her outstretched hand remained in the air between them, a silent demand that couldn't be ignored any longer. "I'm waiting, May," the teacher said, her voice taking on the edge that usually sent students scrambling to comply. "This is your final warning before I send you to the principal's office." The class held its collective breath. Even the usual troublemakers were completely still, watching the scene unfold with unusual interest. May's hand moved slowly toward her hat, but instead of removing it, she simply adjusted it, pulling it even more securely over her ears. "No," she whispered, but the word carried across the silent classroom as if she had shouted it. Ms. Reynolds' eyes widened in shock. In her 15 years of teaching, she had never encountered such a direct refusal to follow a simple rule. "Excuse." "Me?" she asked, certain she must have misheard. "I said no," May repeated, her voice a little stronger this time. "I can't take it off. Not today." The other students watched in uncomfortable silence. A few exchanged knowing glances. They had noticed how May had been different these past months, how she had quietly excused herself from gym class, how sometimes she would disappear for days, only to return looking paler than before. Ms. Reynolds, however, saw only defiance. She was used to being the authority in her classroom, and this public challenge could not go unanswered. "This is not a negotiation," she said, walking briskly toward May's desk. "The school handbook clearly states—" "Please," May interrupted, something she had never done before. "Just for today." But Ms. Reynolds had already made up her mind. This was about more than a hat now. This was about maintaining order and respect in her classroom. With one swift motion, she reached down and plucked the burgundy hat from May's head. "Rules are rules," she declared triumphantly, turning to face the class with the hat in her hand, ready to make an example of this situation. Behind her, the students' faces changed from curiosity to shock. Several gasped audibly. Lynn's hand flew to her mouth. The boy behind May dropped his pencil with a clatter that echoed in the suddenly frozen classroom. Ms. Reynolds turned back toward May, confused by the reaction, and then she understood why the girl had fought so hard to keep her hat. Time seemed to stop in room 203. Ms. Reynolds stood frozen, the burgundy hat dangling from her fingers, her mouth slightly open as she stared at May. The girl's head was completely bare, not a single strand of hair remained. Her scalp was pale and smooth, marked with a thin, healing scar that ran along the side of her head. The silence in the classroom was deafening. Even the usual sounds of the school building, distant footsteps, lockers closing, the hum of the heating system, seemed to have faded away. For what felt like an eternity, no one moved. May's eyes, large and dark, looked up at her teacher without anger or embarrassment, just a quiet dignity that made her seem much older than her 14 years. A single tear slid down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away with the back of her hand. "I tried to tell you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ms. Reynolds felt her heart drop to her stomach. The hat in her hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. She had been so focused on rules and authority that she hadn't stopped to wonder why this normally obedient student was so determined to keep her hat on. Now the answer was painfully obvious to everyone in the room. "May, Ms. Reynolds began, but the words caught in her throat. What could she possibly say now? The other students were starting to whisper among themselves. Some looked shocked, others sympathetic, and a few seemed close to tears themselves. Lynn had half risen from her seat, clearly wanting to go to her friend but unsure if she should. "It's okay," May said, straightening her shoulders. Everyone was going to find out eventually. But it wasn't okay. Ms. Reynolds knew that. She had publicly humiliated a student who was clearly going through something unimaginable, all for the sake of a school rule that suddenly seemed so trivial, so meaningless compared to what this girl was facing. "Class," Ms. Reynolds finally managed to say, her voice not quite steady. "Please open your textbooks and read Chapter 7 quietly to yourselves. I need to speak with May for a moment." She gently placed the burgundy hat on May's desk and gestured toward the door. "Would you mind stepping into the hallway with me for a minute?" May hesitated, looking at the hat. After a moment's pause, she picked it up and placed it back on her head before following Ms. Reynolds out of the classroom. The soft click of the door closing behind them seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet hallway. "I had no idea," Ms. Reynolds said once they were alone. Her voice was filled with remorse. "Why didn't you say something?" May leaned against the wall, suddenly looking very tired. "I didn't want to be treated differently. I've been dealing with this for months now, and I'm tired of the sad looks and whispers. At least here at school everything was normal. But there are exceptions to the rules for medical reasons. That would have meant everyone knowing," May interrupted. "The principal, the office staff, other teachers, word gets around. And then I'd be that sick girl instead of just May." Ms. Reynolds felt a lump forming in her throat. She thought about how she had called out May in front of the entire class, how she had been so determined to win this small battle of wills. The shame was overwhelming. "I'm so sorry," she said, meaning it more than any apology she had ever given. What I did was inexcusable. May looked up at her teacher, studying her face. You didn't know. That's no excuse. I should have asked why instead of assuming you were just being difficult. Ms. Reynolds hesitated, then asked gently, May I ask what? Brain tumor, May replied matter-of-factly. They found it 5 months ago. The surgery was 3 weeks ago. And now I'm doing treatments to make sure it doesn't come back. The clinical way she described it made it even more heartbreaking. This girl had been facing a life-threatening illness, while still worrying about homework and tests and school rules. And you've been coming to school through all of this? Ms. Reynolds asked, amazed at the girl's determination. May nodded. I missed 2 weeks after the surgery, but my mom helped me keep up with the assignments. I don't want to fall behind. Ms. Reynolds felt a newfound respect blooming for this quiet, determined student whom she had so badly misjudged. That's incredibly brave. Not really, May shrugged. I just want things to be normal. That's why I wore the hat. My hair. She touched the hat gently. It all fell out after they started the treatments. I thought if I wore the hat, I could just be like everyone, else for a few hours each day. Ms. Reynolds felt tears pressing at the back of her eyes, but she blinked them away. May didn't need her pity right now. What can I do? She asked instead. How can I help make school feel normal for you? May seemed surprised by the question. She had clearly expected punishment, not support. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe just, don't make a big deal about it. I don't want special treatment. What about the hat? Ms. Reynolds asked. I think we can certainly make an exception. No, May said firmly. No exceptions. That would just make me stand out more, but maybe... She hesitated. Maybe you could just pretend not to notice it. Just for a little while until... She didn't finish the sentence, but Ms. Reynolds understood. Until her hair grew back. Until the treatments were over. Until life could truly return to normal. I think I can manage that, Ms. Reynolds said with a small smile. Ready to go back in? May nodded, adjusting her hat slightly. As they walked back toward the classroom door, Ms. Reynolds realized something had shifted between them. The teacher had learned a lesson far more important than anything in her curriculum, and the student had shown a kind of strength that couldn't be taught in any classroom. As Ms. Reynolds reached for the door handle, she hesitated, turning back to May. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? May asked, genuinely confused. For reminding me that there's always more to the story than what we can see. Ms. Reynolds opened the classroom door, and all eyes immediately turned toward them. The room had been buzzing with whispers, but it fell silent the moment May stepped back inside. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor as she walked to her desk, the burgundy hat once again covering her bare head. Ms. Reynolds cleared her throat. Let's continue with today's lesson, shall we? She tried to sound normal, but there was a slight tremor in her voice that her students had never heard before. As she turned to write on the whiteboard, May settled back into her seat. Lynn leaned over slightly, her eyes full of questions, but May just gave a small shake of her head. Not now. The lesson continued, but nobody was really paying attention. The secret was out now, and everyone was stealing glances at May when they thought she wouldn't notice. She could feel their eyes on her, filled with curiosity and pity, exactly what she had been trying to avoid all these months. Halfway through the lesson, a folded piece of paper landed on May's desk. She opened it carefully, making sure Ms. Reynolds wouldn't see. Inside was a simple drawing of a girl wearing a burgundy hat with the words, "You're awesome," written underneath. The drawing wasn't signed, but when May glanced around, she caught Zach, the quiet boy who sat by the window giving her a small smile. For the first time that day, May felt a little better. Maybe being seen for who she really was wouldn't be so terrible after all. When the bell rang to signal the end of class, everyone gathered their books and filed out. May moved slowly, not eager to face the hallways and the questions that would surely come. As she was about to leave, Ms. Reynolds called her name. "Would you like to stay here during lunch period?" the teacher offered softly. "It might be easier." May nodded gratefully. She wasn't ready to deal with the crowded cafeteria just yet, but as she settled back into her seat, the classroom door opened again. Lynn poked her head in. "Can I stay too?" she asked, looking at Ms. Reynolds. Before the teacher could answer, more faces appeared in the doorway. Zach from the window seat, Tanya and her twin brother Kai from the front row, and several others. "Us too?" Tanya asked. Ms. Reynolds looked at May, leaving the decision to her. After a moment's hesitation, May nodded. Soon, a small crowd had gathered around May's desk, lunches spread out on nearby tables. At first, no one seemed to know what to say. They ate in awkward silence until Zach finally spoke up. "So, does your head get cold?" he asked, then immediately turned red. "Sorry, that was stupid." But to everyone's surprise, May smiled. "Actually, yeah. It's like having permanent brain freeze." A few nervous laughs rippled through the group. The ice was broken. "How long have you been sick?" Lynn asked, the question everyone had been wondering. May took a deep breath. She had been keeping this secret for so long. It felt strange to finally talk about it openly. "They found the tumor 5 months ago," she said. "Right after my birthday, that's why I missed school for a few days back then. I was having tests done." "5 months?" Tanya gasped. "You've been dealing with this for 5 months and never told anyone?" May shrugged. "I told Lynn a little bit, and my parents told the principal, but I asked them not to tell anyone else. I didn't want to be treated differently." Are you going to be okay?" Kai asked hesitantly. The question hung in the air. Even Ms. Reynolds, who had been pretending to grade papers at her desk while listening to the conversation, looked up. May took off her hat and ran her hand over her smooth head. The surgical scar stood out against her pale skin, a visible reminder of everything she had been through. "The doctors think so," she said finally. "The surgery went well. They got the whole tumor. Now I'm doing treatments to make sure it doesn't come back." "Is that why?" Zach gestured vaguely toward her head. "Yeah. The medicine they give me made all my hair fall out. They said it will grow back eventually, but..." She trailed off, suddenly feeling self-conscious again. "I think you look cool," Kai said unexpectedly. "Like a warrior." May blinked in surprise. "A warrior?" "Yeah," he continued with growing enthusiasm. "Like those ancient warriors who shaved their heads before battle. It was a sign of strength. Or like those monks who shaved their heads to show nothing can distract them from what's important," Tanya added. Ms. Reynolds watched as May's face transformed. The girl who had been so determined to hide was now sitting up straighter, a new light in her eyes. "I never thought of it that way," May admitted. "Can I see the scar?" Zach asked, then quickly added, "Only if you want to show it, of course." May hesitated only briefly before turning her head to show the curved line where the surgeons had operated. She had always seen it as something ugly, something to hide, but her classmates leaned forward with genuine interest, not disgust. "That's going to be an awesome scar when it heals," Lynn said admiringly. For the first time since her diagnosis, May felt a bubble of laughter rise in her throat. Not nervous laughter, or the kind that comes from trying not to cry, but real, genuine amusement at how differently her friends were seeing this situation. "You guys are weird," she said, but she was smiling. "Says the girl with the cool warrior head," Zach quipped, and that did it. May burst out laughing, a sound that startled even herself. She couldn't remember the last time she had really laughed. Ms. Reynolds watched in amazement as the girl who had been so solemn all these months doubled over with giggles, her burgundy hat clutched in her hands. The other students joined in, the tension in the room finally breaking completely. When May finally caught her breath, she looked down at the hat in her hands. After a moment's consideration, she placed it back on her head, but differently this time. Not pulled down low to hide, but sitting proudly on top like a crown. "The hat does keep my head warm," she said with a small shrug. "And I like the color." "It suits you," Lynn told her. As the lunch period continued, the conversation shifted to other topics. Upcoming tests, the latest music, rumors about the cafeteria food. For the first time in months, May was just another student, part of the group. Not defined by her illness, but not having to hide it either. Ms. Reynolds watched it all from her desk, marveling at the resilience of these young people. What had begun as one of the worst moments of her teaching career had somehow transformed into something unexpectedly beautiful. The afternoon bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period. May's classmates gathered their things, but nobody seemed in a hurry to leave. The atmosphere in room 203 had changed completely. What had started as one of the worst days of May's school, life had somehow turned into something unexpectedly meaningful. "See you tomorrow?" Lynn asked as she picked up her backpack. May nodded. "Yeah, I'll be here." "With the hat?" Zach asked with a small grin. May touched the burgundy hat that now sat more confidently on her head. "Definitely with the hat." As the other students filed out to their next classes, Ms. Reynolds approached May's desk. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. That was a lot to handle in one day. "I'm okay," May said, and she was surprised to realize it was true. The secret was out now and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it felt like a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Actually, I think I'm better than okay." Ms. Reynolds smiled. "You have good friends." "Yeah," May agreed, watching as the last of her classmates left the room. "I guess I do." The afternoon classes passed in a blur. Word had spread through the school, as it always did, but instead of facing stares and whispers alone, May found herself surrounded by a protective circle of classmates. When someone from another class stared too long at her hat, Tanya would step between them. When a group of older students started whispering, Kai loudly told a joke to distract May. By the end of the day, May was exhausted but smiling as she gathered her books from her locker. The emotional roller coaster of the day had left her tired, but it was a good kind of tired, like after a long hike when you finally reach the top of a mountain. As she closed her locker, she found Lynn waiting for her. "Want me to walk home with you?" "Sure," May said, grateful for the company. They were almost to the school exit when they heard someone calling May's name. Turning, they saw Ms. Reynolds hurrying down the hallway toward them, something clutched in her hand. "I'm glad I caught you," the teacher said, slightly out of breath. "I wanted to give you this." She held out what looked like a small pin, a burgundy ribbon shaped into a simple loop. "It's called an awareness ribbon," Ms. Reynolds explained. "Each color represents a different cause. I looked it up during my free period. Burgundy is the color for brain tumor awareness." May stared at the small pin, touched by the gesture. "I didn't know that," she admitted. "I just liked the color of the hat my mom got me." "Sometimes things work out that way," Ms. Reynolds said with a smile. "I thought maybe you could pin it to your hat if you wanted to." May carefully took the pin, turning it over in her hand. "Thank you." As they walked home, Lynn couldn't stop talking about the day's events. "Did you see how Zach stood up for you when those 6th graders were staring? I've never even heard him raise his voice before." May smiled, thinking about the quiet boy who had drawn the picture that started it all. "Yeah, that was pretty cool. And Tanya and Kai are telling everyone about brain tumor awareness now. I think Tanya even yelled at someone for making a stupid joke." The thought of her classmates defending her made May feel both embarrassed and grateful. She had spent so much time trying to hide her condition, afraid of what people would think, that she had never considered they might actually support her. When they reached May's house, her mother was waiting anxiously on the porch. She rushed down the steps as soon as she saw them. "May, the school called and told me what happened this morning. Are you okay, sweetheart?" May hugged her mother tightly. "I'm okay, Mom." "Really?" Her mother pulled back to look at her face, searching for signs of distress. Instead, she found her daughter smiling. "You look happy," she said, sounding puzzled. "It turned out better than I expected," May explained. She showed her mother the burgundy ribbon pin that Ms. Reynolds had given her. "Did you know burgundy is the color for brain tumor awareness?" Her mother's eyes widened. "No, I had no idea. I just picked that hat because you said you liked the color." They all laughed at the coincidence, and May's mother invited Lynn to stay for dinner. As they went inside, May felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time since her diagnosis, she felt like herself again. Not a patient, not a secret keeper, just May. That evening, as she was getting ready for bed, May's phone buzzed with a message from Lynn. Check the class group chat. Curious, May opened the chat to find dozens of new messages. As she scrolled through, her eyes grew wide. Her classmates were planning something. Bringing my burgundy scarf tomorrow, Tanya had written. Found a burgundy shirt in my closet, someone else added. My sister has some burgundy ribbon. Making wristbands tonight, another message read. Message after message showed her classmates planning to wear something burgundy the next day. As a show of support for May, May felt tears prick at her eyes, but for once, they were happy tears. She typed a quick thank you into the chat, but it didn't seem enough to express what she was feeling. Her mother knocked softly and entered her room. Everything okay? You look like you're about to cry. Wordlessly, May handed her the phone. Her mother read through the messages, her own eyes filling with tears. These are good kids, she said finally, handing the phone back. Yeah, May agreed. They really are. That night, for the first time in months, May slept peacefully, without worrying about the next day. Her burgundy hat sat on her bedside table, the small awareness ribbon pin already attached to the front. In room 203, Ms. Reynolds was working late, preparing for tomorrow's lessons. But tonight, she was also doing something else. On her desk lay a burgundy scarf she had purchased on her way home, and beside it, a stack of burgundy ribbon similar to the pin she had given May. The teacher smiled to herself as she cut the ribbon into small pieces, enough for every teacher in the school. Tomorrow would be different, not just for May, but for all of them. The next morning, May woke up earlier than usual. For the first time in months, she felt excited to go to school. She carefully placed her burgundy hat on her head, adjusting it so the awareness ribbon pin was clearly visible. As she studied her reflection in the mirror, she realized she was no longer trying to hide. She was making a statement. Her father was waiting at the breakfast table, reading the morning newspaper. He looked up as she entered, a warm smile spreading across his face. Look at you, he said proudly. My brave girl. May's mother had told him everything about yesterday, and he had listened with tears in his eyes. This morning, May noticed something different about him, a small burgundy handkerchief tucked into his shirt pocket. Is that for me? She asked, pointing to it. He nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Your mother and I are with you every step of the way. The walk to school felt different that day. May held her head high, no longer afraid of being seen. When she reached the school gates, Lynn was waiting for her, wearing a burgundy headband and a huge grin. Ready? Lynn asked. May took a deep breath and nodded. Ready. They walked through the doors together and May stopped in her tracks. The hallway was filled with splashes of burgundy, students wearing burgundy shirts, scarves, hair clips, shoelaces. Some had just a small touch, like a burgundy pin tucked behind an ear, while others had gone all out with burgundy face paint and clothing. As May stood frozen in amazement, Zach appeared beside her wearing a burgundy wristband. Morning, he said casually, as if nothing unusual was happening. Like what we did with the place? When did... May couldn't form a complete sentence. The class group chat was busy last night, Lynn explained with a grin, and it spread to other classes too. As they walked to room 203, students May barely knew smiled at her or nodded in greeting. Some even touched their own burgundy items in silent acknowledgement. By the time they reached the classroom, May was overwhelmed by the show of support. When they stepped inside, the biggest surprise was waiting. Ms. Reynolds stood at her desk, wearing a burgundy blouse and a matching scarf, but she wasn't alone. The principal, Mr. Chen, was there too, a burgundy tie around his neck. Good morning, May, the principal said warmly. Ms. Reynolds has told me about yesterday. I want to apologize that you felt you had to hide your condition from us. May shook her head. It wasn't your fault. I asked my parents not to tell anyone. Well, we want you to know that you have our full support, Mr. Chen continued. In fact, we have an announcement to make. As the rest of the class filed in, every single student wearing something burgundy, Mr. Chen cleared his throat and addressed them all. Today marks the beginning of what I hope will become a tradition at our school, he said. From now on, the first Monday of every month will be known as Burgundy Monday, a day to show support for those facing health challenges, to celebrate courage, and to remember that we are all stronger together. A cheer went up from the students. May felt her cheeks flush with a mix of embarrassment and happiness. May, Mr. Chen said, turning to her, your courage has inspired us all. Would you do us the honor of helping to make this official? From behind his back, he produced a burgundy banner with the words, "Courage comes in many colors," painted across it. With trembling hands, May accepted a marker and signed her name at the bottom of the banner. One by one, her classmates joined her, adding their signatures until the entire bottom of the banner was filled with names. This will hang in the main hallway, Mr. Chen announced, as a reminder that no one in this school ever has to face their battles alone. As the principal left and the class settled in for their lesson, Ms. Reynolds approached May's desk. "Are you okay with all of this?" she asked quietly. "I know you didn't want special attention." May looked around at her classmates, all wearing burgundy, all smiling at her. This didn't feel like the kind of attention she had feared. This felt like belonging. "Yes," she said. "I'm more than okay with it." The rest of the day passed in a blur of burgundy and smiles. In the cafeteria, May no longer sat with just Lynn. Her table was now full of friends, both old and new. Even students from other grades stopped by to introduce themselves, some sharing stories of their own health struggles or those of family members. By the time the final bell rang, May was exhausted, but happier than she had been in months. As she packed up her books, she noticed a small notebook on her desk that wasn't hers. Opening it, she found a note from Ms. Reynolds. "Dear May, yesterday I thought I was teaching you about school rules. Today you taught the entire school about courage. Thank you for the most important lesson I've ever learned in my classroom. Ms. R." Attached to the note was a small key. The note continued, "This is to the art supply closet. I've spoken with the art teacher. You and your friends are welcome to use the supplies after school to make more awareness ribbons and signs for our first official Burgundy Monday next month." May clutched the notebook to her chest, overwhelmed by the gesture. As she left the school building that afternoon, surrounded by friends wearing burgundy, she couldn't help but think about how differently this day had turned out from what she had expected. Yesterday morning, she had been so afraid of anyone finding out about her condition that she was willing to break school rules to keep her secret. Now her story had somehow transformed an entire school. Her parents were waiting at the school gate, both wearing burgundy. Her mother's eyes widened as she took in the sea of burgundy-clad students streaming out of the building. "What happened?" she asked in amazement. May just smiled. "Something good," she said simply. "Something really good." 6 months later, May stood in front of the school wearing a new hat, a colorful beanie covering her short, fuzzy new hair that was finally growing back. Her treatments had ended successfully, and her doctors were optimistic about her future. But every first Monday of the month, the burgundy hat came out of its special place in her closet, and she proudly wore it to school. And she wasn't alone. The entire school, from the youngest student to the oldest teacher, wore burgundy on those days. What had begun as one girl's attempt to hide had transformed into a powerful reminder that no one should have to face their struggles alone. And whenever a new student arrived at the school and asked about the strange tradition of Burgundy Mondays, someone would tell them the story of the girl who refused to take off her hat, and how, when the teacher finally took it away, she had found the courage to laugh and show the world who she really was.